if you want to sound like a pro when it comes to the blasting and coating industry, there's some key terms that you want to know, and I'm going to go through those so you at least know what they are and have a somewhat of an idea of when you can use them, so that way you can sound intelligent when you're talking about blasting and coating. So one is blast profile or surface profile. That is how textured the substrate is, or the surface is, after we blast it. So when I say what's the blast profile look like on that? How much blast profile does that have? There's a way to measure the blast profile. We do that typically in mils, and when you measure a blast profile, it could be 1 to 3 mils. On average, you're probably around a 2 mil blast profile, or 2 thousandths. And essentially, that's measuring the distance between the peaks and valleys of that blast profile. Second one, when we're going to switch over to coatings now, be film thickness. It's thickness of the film. What's the film? The coating. How do we measure that? We use a film thickness gauge. Very expensive gauge, but what is it doing? It reads the thickness of the coating itself. So part of our quality control process is to see how much film thickness do we have on the part. If there's not enough, that means it's probably going to rust. So we have to rework it and put it back through and add more film thickness so it doesn't rust. And so if a part looks weird, or it looks light and see-through, or it looks heavy and a weird orange peel, and maybe even possibly some runs or sags, which it is possible in powder coating to get that, then you could say, I think there's too much film thickness. Or if you can see through it, I don't think they put enough film thickness on this. When we say shooting, most people will think that that's a gun, or like hunting or something. But the reason why we say shooting is because when we're powder coating or we're painting, the piece of equipment that we use, that's called a gun that you hold in your hand. It's a powder gun. There's powder coating coming out of the end of the powder gun, or there's paint coming out of the end of the paint gun. So when we say that we're shooting something, or we need to shoot that really quick, or shoot that again, we're talking about spraying, essentially. That's what that stands for. Pre-treatment. What does pre-treatment mean? That has to do with cleaning the part and applying a chemical to the part that helps with corrosion protection, and it helps with adhesion. Phosphate, iron phosphate, zirconium, alkaline cleaner. These are all pre-treatment chemicals. So an alkaline cleaner, we're just using that to clean grease and oil. An iron phosphate, we're using that to pre-treat steel. Zirconium, we're using that to pre-treat aluminum or stainless steel. So if you're talking to a potential powder coater or your friend about getting something steel powder coated, and you want to sound cool, you could say, yeah, I'm going to tell them that they need to use an alkaline cleaner to get all the grease and oils off this thing, and then some really good iron phosphate. So that way I can get some better corrosion protection, and the powder coating is going to stick really, really good. Or if you have an aluminum piece that you want pre-treated and powder coated, you can say, yeah, I'm going to make sure that I specify to this powder coating company that this needs zirconium pre-treatment, because iron phosphate won't build on aluminum, but zirconium will. Super durable, ultra durable, and you might think, are these weird, just fancy marketing terms? Possibly, but actually there are categories of powder coating that we would call super durable. And the reason why we call it that is because it holds up better. So it actually has different chemistry in the powder itself. A super durable powder coating typically is some sort of a 5-year powder. Usually when we're talking about super durable, we're talking about the color and gloss retention, and a little bit with corrosion protection, but mostly we're talking about color and gloss. So is it going to fade? Is the bright red going to fade to pink? Is the really high glossy surface going to get dulled way down and have no gloss anymore? That's kind of what we're talking about when we say super durable versus regular durable. So that is actually a very important lingo to know, that if you're getting your parts powder coated and they're going outside, you should specify that you want the powder coating that's going to get used to be super durable, because you want it to hold up better outside in the sun. Curing. So what does curing mean? That's going to be how we get the powder coating to go from powder to a nice, smooth, finished, coated surface. So we use an oven to cure the powder, similar to maybe if you're like baking cookies, I guess. So we put the powder coated part in an oven for about 25 or 30 minutes. The length of time depends on the type of part that we're putting in and how big it is. And usually it's around a 400-degree oven is where we have the temperature set. And when it's in there, it's curing out. When it comes out of the oven and it's cooled down, we say it's cured. It's ready to ship. Back ionization. So this is something very particular to the powder coating application process when you're actually spraying powder on a part. The part is grounded, the powder is charged, and so the charged powder coating is landing on the surface of the part, and if you put too much powder on there, meaning too much charge, and the substrate itself gets charged up, the powder will start to back ionize. And what that means is the powder itself on the part won't lay down evenly anymore. The powder dust particles, you can actually see them start moving around on the part. They'll kind of land on there and then they'll scatter and move. And they usually will have areas where they collect, where there's like a charge concentration, and the areas where there's not charge concentration. So they usually will collect, and it'll make what kind of looks like a lot of bumps or polka dots on the surface. And that's what we call back ionization. Definitely something that you don't want to happen. It makes the parts look really bad, and it is fixable, but it's not easy to fix. And sometimes you have to blow all the powder off the part and start back over completely. Do pre-treatment again, put it in the oven again, and then powder coat again, because that's really the only way to get all that charge out of the part so you can start over and try to spray powder again. Or if you don't see your back ionization and you cure it out, then you will see all these bumps that look really nasty, and then it has to be sanded out, and then it can be powder coated again. Overbake. So that is what it sounds like. Powder just got left in the oven too long, essentially. Either the temperature was too high, or we left it in the oven for too long. And when that happens, it could change the color of the powder. If it was white, it could be yellow now. It also can affect the gloss. So if it's supposed to be really high gloss, the gloss can start to fall out of it if you overbake it. Another term that kind of goes along with overbaking is scorching. So overbake and scorching are kind of the same. It has to do with problems in the oven. Scorching is way too high a temperature, way too fast. Where overbake could just be, oh, we left it in the oven for too long. It was the right temperature, but we accidentally left it in the oven for 2 hours and it was only supposed to be in there for 30 minutes. So those are two terms that get utilized when we're talking about the cure process in the oven. Overbaking can happen if you're just not paying attention. Scorching is hard to do unless you like accidentally set the oven for like 100 degrees hotter than what you should, or the oven is just not working right. If you ever get a powder coated part that's white and it's kind of like yellowish or maybe even brownish, that could be because it got overbaked. Or if you have a part that was supposed to be a pretty high gloss and there's areas where it looks great, but other areas where the gloss is kind of knocked out of it. It's satin over here, but it's glossy over here. That's because overbake has started to happen in that particular area. It's too cured. It's over cured. Scuff. So when we say scuff, usually we're just talking about sanding something with sandpaper, essentially. We'll scuff parts before we pre-treat them, maybe to get loose blast media off, maybe to get some miscellaneous light surface rust off. We will scuff parts before we spray powder on them to get any loose debris. We could have parts that got sprayed and they're see-through and we need to rework, and we could say, hey, scuff all those parts and then reshoot them. Nest or nesting. You might think that has to do with a bird, but it doesn't. When we're hanging parts and we want to have multiple pieces hung in a column, basically, maybe the parts are only like this tall, but our cart is 6 foot tall. So we can hang multiple ones off of each other, like in a daisy chain, I guess. We call that nesting. So we're gonna nest all those parts together. Or that we have 6 pieces that will say nest them in sets of 2. So you're going to hang 1, 2, and then 1, 2 if we're nesting. So a lot of the time when we're talking about hanging, the term nesting comes up a lot. Sometimes we'll say do not nest. We don't want them to be nested because it would make it too hard to spray. Other verbiage that comes along with hanging has to do with hooks and hook sizes. Everybody's hooks are a little bit different. So you can get V hooks, so they're like in the shape kind of like a V at the top, so they actually hook over top of something. There are C hooks, so they're more rounded. They don't have a point anywhere. There's S hooks that looks like same thing as a C, but it just looks like an S essentially. We have some hooks that are squared off at the top. So instead of it being like a V at the top, it's actually squared. So it really can sit over something and not move. And then there's different thicknesses and lengths of hooks. So it's pretty common if people are hanging and communicating with one another, say, hey, I need some thick 12s. So that's our pretty big diameter 12-inch hook. Or I need some skinny 4s. So 4-inch long hook, but our tiny ones because they want it skinny because it's really light parts and they don't want a big hook mark. So when it comes to hanging, we're just kind of describing the hook that we need in as quick and short of words as we possibly can. So thick and thin have to do with the diameter of the hook. Long and short have to do with the length of the hook. And like that's all describing the shape of the hook itself. Pass, P-A-S-S, pass, or passes. So we use that a lot to describe how we spray and how we pre-treat. That's how we communicate to each other the pattern that we're spraying or pre-treating at, and how much time we're spending on it, essentially. 2 passes on every surface, 4 passes on every surface, 6 passes on every surface. Same thing with pre-treatment. 4 pass, 6 pass, 8 pass. So we say passes meaning how many times are we going across a part, right? So we say 2 passes like 1, 2. So it gives us a way to communicate to one another essentially how much powder we want to build on something or how much pre-treatment conversion coating we want to build on something. So the higher number of passes, the more time we're spending with it. So like the cleaner we should be able to get apart if we put a lot of passes on in the wash bay, or the thicker we're going to get the coating if we put more passes on in the spray booth. Aggressive or aggressiveness, this usually comes from blasting. So when we're talking about different types of media or blast media that we use, and we'll talk about the aggressiveness of the media. So if it's very aggressive, it's usually abrasive, meaning it's going to give you a really deep profile. Could damage the part. If it's not very aggressive, then that's probably a media that is better for fragile parts. It's not going to be as deep of a blast profile. It's going to be harder to warp parts. So if somebody tells me that they want a really aggressive blast profile, I know that we can use our most aggressive media at a really high pressure with a nozzle that makes the media move really, really fast, essentially. Brush blast. So that's if we're going to blast something very, very quick and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. I might tell our blast operator to just brush this real quick because we're in a hurry. I might tell them to just brush blast it because it's really thin and we don't want to warp it. I might tell them just brush blast it because it really doesn't need to be blasted that well and we're just trying to quickly get a profile on it. When you're painting with an airless sprayer, if you don't have the settings right, you can get what's called fingering. And basically, if you're spraying paint on something, and so like you're aiming right here, so you got all kinds of paint in the middle, but you have these lines along the outside, that's called fingering, or those are called fingers. And if you're painting and you have those, you could say it's fingering. The reason why that happens is because the viscosity of the paint is not right, essentially. Atomizing the paint means like getting it to spray in more of a mist form. So if you're not atomizing the paint well enough, you can get fingers along the outside of your spray pattern. And you adjust that by, you can maybe thin the paint down, because if you make the paint thinner, it'll atomize better. Now you don't have fingers. If you can't thin the paint, you could turn the pressure up, because pushing more pressure, paint at more pressure through the tip, usually will atomize it better, and you can get rid of the fingers. Sometimes you have the pressure maxed out and you have the paint thinned as much as you can and you're still getting fingers. Then you need a bigger size tip, and when you go with a bigger size tip, then it can atomize better. You're not squeezing really thick paint through this tiny orifice, you're on a bigger orifice, and then the fingers will go away.